Algebra 1, Lesson 79. We are first factoring our trinomials using our greatest common factor and then fully factoring using the methods that we've seen in previous lessons. So let's get right into this. With our first example here, we need to figure out what is the greatest common factor between x to the fourth plus 5x cubed plus 6x squared. And we look at the coefficients and we say, well, the coefficients don't have anything in common, but the variables do. We actually have an x squared in common with each of these, and so we factor it out. We say x squared on the outside, and then whatever we have left, we have an x squared plus 5x plus 6, taking out that x squared from each of the terms. And then we go ahead, after factoring, we are going to factor the trinomial. Now this is a simple trinomial, so we can just say, because our a value in front of that x squared is just 1, we can think about, well, what multiplies to give me 6 and adds to give me 5? Well, that would be 2 and 3. So we can factor this by saying x plus 2 times x plus 3. And now we have fully factored our trinomial. Okay. Alright, next example here, let's try it again. 4x cubed minus 4x squared minus 80x. It looks like we have a 4 in common in the coefficients and an x in common with the variables. So we factor that out and we get an x squared minus x and then minus 20. Which means, once again, a simple trinomial where we need to multiply to give me negative 20, add to give me negative 1. Always getting the product from this last term and the sum from the middle. So we say, well, that could be x minus 5 and x plus 4. That would give me a product of negative 20 and a sum of negative 1. And so that is my factorization. All right, continuing on, looks like we don't have any of the coefficients in common, but we do have an a cubed in common. And we factor that out and we get an a squared plus 3a minus 18, which means we once again have a simpler trinomial. We're going to multiply to get negative 18, add to get 3. So for this, it looks like, well, we need one negative, one positive, and, well, it looks like those numbers are positive 6 and negative 3, because that multiplies to give me negative 18, adds to give me 3. Greatest common factor, greatest common monomial first, and then continue factoring. So just a couple more examples here. Factoring out a 2m squared, so that we have an m squared minus 8m plus 15. So looks like we can factor, just like normal, a product of 15, a sum of negative 8, which means we're going to get an m minus 3 and an m minus 5. All right. Now, sometimes we get up to things like this and we say, well, there's really nothing in common within any of the terms. But to make our lives a whole lot easier, we're going to actually factor out a negative 1, because working with a positive x squared is a whole lot easier than working with a negative x squared. So we factor out a negative 1. We say negative 1 times x squared minus x minus 56, which means that we can say negative 1 times, all right, the product is negative 56, the sum is negative 1, which means we can do an x minus 8 and an x plus 7. That would make a product of negative 56 and add up to a negative 1. All right, I'm just going to show you a couple more examples here. Factor out to make that first term positive. So in this case, factor out a negative 3, okay, and an x, negative 3 and an x, and then factor like normal. Okay, a couple more examples here for you to try. You can try these ones. So I'll just show you this first one. You can try the same method on the second one. So in this first case, we have a couple of variables here. Now we can take out a p from each of the variables, or each of the terms, and also a q squared, which means that inside of our parenthesis we have a q squared plus 5q minus 14, which means that we can then continue to factor this. It makes it a whole lot easier by factoring out that greatest common factor first. And we get a q plus 7 and a q minus 2. All right, and similar process for the lower one. We can factor out an a and a b and a 3. So 3ab can factor out of each of those, which will make your next factoring a whole lot easier. Okay, same idea here, but yes, remember, once you factored out that greatest common factor, write in standard form, so meaning largest exponent to smallest. Now we can use this method to help ourselves with different problems, especially when we want to know a certain amount. It's easier actually to factor first and then plug in information. So, for example, the height of a golf ball hit from an elevated T 40 meters above the hole is negative 5t squared plus 35t plus 40, where t represents time. Factor completely. So, we are going to factor out a negative 5 first. So we get negative 5 times t squared minus 7t minus 8. And we want to factor fully, so we have negative 5, and then, all right, we want to multiply to give me a negative 8, add to give me a negative 7, which means we're going to have a t minus 8 and a t plus 1. Okay? So then we could actually plug in information from for any amount of time into this equation to help ourselves. Same idea for this last problem that you can try on your own. All right, well, I hope this helps for your homework and for studying.